Hey folks, Andrew from Gameosity, and today we're going to be looking at one of the most ambitious multiplayer asymmetrical games I've ever seen. It's Vast from Leader Games, and it's vast. So, Vast is a dungeon crawler, and basically that means that the players will engage this dungeon that they will be moving through, and there's treasure to be found, and monsters to be fought, dragons and goblins, and there are brave knights who are trying to win by slaying dragons and all that sort of thing. But what's really amazing about Vast, what makes it truly unique, is that it is a tremendously asymmetrical game, which means that one player is playing the knight, and another player is playing the goblins, and another player is playing the dragons, and there's a thief, and then there's the dungeon itself, and it's really, really interesting. And each player is playing this different game. This is mechanically different. It's a little difficult to summarize beyond that, so let's take a look at the individual roles and kind of a quick sense of how they play. So the first thing to just be aware of for the rest of this video is the fact that Vast has a bunch of different representations for its player pieces. The base game comes with both like cardboard standees with really nice art and with unique wooden meeples. And if you get the minis expansion, it actually has like, plastic highly detailed molded miniatures for the characters. So you might see them sort of switched in and out. I'm mostly going to be sticking with the miniatures version because they look really nice and they stand up off the table. But at any rate, as I was saying, each character in Vast plays a completely different game. The one we're going to start with is the knight. So the knight comes to the cave to slay the dragon, and the knight's gameplay is all about wandering through the dark cave, discovering different rooms, finding treasure, and each turn is going to be using grit cubes to assign and reassign stats. The knight may complete side quests in order to get gear and get upgrades, and there's a lot of like variables about how the character plays in terms of like, once the knight has a bow, they can attack at range. She'll use the bombs to blow through walls and to destroy crystals and to attack the dragon when it's in the depths of the cave, and the knight wins if it can manage to slay the dragon. It's pretty classic sort of adventure story. Now, the goblins are denizens of the cave, and they take great exception to the fact that the knight has shown up to wreak havoc. And the goblins are really interesting because they're represented by 3 different tribes, and each tribe has slightly different advantages and disadvantages. The tribe of the Fangs is really good at fighting. The tribe of the Bones is extra good at summoning monsters because they can summon these these cave monsters that work for them, like trolls and ogres and such. And then the Eye tribe are sort of the secret holders of the Goblin Nation. They can do all sorts of wonky things. Essentially, the Goblins game is all about sort of building up of these tribal units and then sending them into the dungeon. The Goblins win if they can manage to defeat the knight. And of course that means that they have to defeat the knight before the knight manages to slay the dragon. And the push-pull of that means that sometimes the goblins will want to get in the knight's way when she's making an attack on the dragon, but of course it doesn't mean that the dragon and the goblins are actually friends in any way. In fact, the one of the things that the dragon likes to do is snack on goblins. So that sort of dynamic already exists. Being a goblin is all about massing up, striking from the shadows, dispersing, and swarming back out onto the board as soon as you're able to. I've been talking a lot about this dragon, so let's take a look at him. The dragon is really just trying to wake up. It's been asleep for millennia, and it wants to come out of the lower depths of the cave, eat some goblins, smash some crystals on the way. It doesn't really matter, but mostly it's trying to shake off that age-old exhaustion to go from sleepy dragon, who buns kind of like a kitty, to awake dragon, who's hungry, like my kitties. But anyway, the Dragons game is all about taking a variety of actions that will result in you waking up, shaking off of these sleep cubes. And the Dragons game is a hand management one. You have sort of a hand of cards that you'll play in different combinations to take different actions, like breathing fire, or using your claws, or moving quickly. And you have a die that helps you determine, like, for example, when you breathe fire, what parts of the cave are affected and what aren't. The fourth player role, and one of the most interesting, is the cave itself. So the cave's goal is to grow, and the cave player is going to be the one that's laying tiles down, first hidden, face down, and then exposed as other adventurers explore the cave successfully. And the cave's goal is to grow to its full size and then begin to collapse. The cave wants to literally do a rocks fall, everyone dies, total party kill. But in order to do that, it's going to act as kind of this interesting load balancer. It needs to make sure that no other role wins before it manages to. So it'll put some treasure for the knight to find. It'll make sure that there are walls between the knight and the dragon when the dragon finally wakes up. It'll place crystals that are valuable depending on your role. And it's a really interesting little twist of a minigame. The final role in the base game, and I say base game, I'll get to what I mean by that in a second, is the thief. The thief is having the worst day. In this sort of Groundhog-esque experience, the thief is trying to grab a bunch of treasure or dragon gems and stash them and then make it out of the cave. And along the way, a thief's going to die probably a bunch of times, but the whole idea is that every time the thief dies, they get to retain the improvements that they've made to themselves, and they're finding gear, and they're learning skills, and all of this stuff that makes it more and more likely that they will succeed. The thief is really fragile, but death is only sort of an inconvenience to him, and getting out and getting rich are the real goals. And that's a vast, just the basics in incredibly short explanations. It is a completely asymmetrical game. Every player is playing a different, not just role, but different mechanics, as I said. And if this all isn't enough for you, the Fearsome Foes expansion actually adds 3 new characters in the form of the ghoul, the unicorn, and the cave ghost. The Nightmare Unicorn, excuse me. And these act as either replacements for or additions to the existing roles, bringing the total player count up to 7 if you include everything. And there is something absolutely just tremendous about this game. It is truly unique in its attitude and approach. When we first saw it, I mean, we were just entranced by how big it seemed, and is something that we love in other games, is when you have variable player powers or asymmetrical goals, because that lends for a more unique and engaging multiplayer experience. And when we realized what this was, and we realized the scope of what it promised, and how at its core was that thing, that asymmetrical gameplay that we think is really, really amazing, we were just incredibly excited about Vast, and that is why it kind of broke our hearts. Because here's the thing. Vast is amazing in the scope of what it's trying to accomplish, but there's so much that every time you sit down to play the game, every person who hasn't played not just Vast before, but who hasn't played that role, is going to have to learn a completely new game. Each role has its own page of instructions that are in some ways a little opaque. They don't really do a good job of laying out essentially what you should be doing on turn 1. You have your goal, for example, but you have the handful of mechanisms that you know about your character, your role, and the game just sort of drops you in and doesn't do a very good job of giving you guidance up front. And that is compounded, as I said, because every time you sit down to play Vast, if you decide, I've played the dragon, this time I want to try playing as the cave, well, you're going to have to read the rules, and of course, some of the familiarity with the way the game works is going to help, but the skills you learned from playing last game on a different role will not translate to the mini-game, which is essentially what they all are, that you're going to be playing when you switch roles, and it makes Vast difficult to break out for new players, especially if you have a table full of new players, because unless you are a person who is familiar with every role, you're not going to be able to coach or guide or help people as they take on their roles. And even that would be kind of forgivable. It's a little annoying, but it would definitely be forgivable if the mini-games themselves were more engaging. The big problem that we had with Vast, and this is the one that just sort of like hurts for us to say, because we wanted to like this game for everything about it, the problem we had was that each individual role, if that was the game you were playing, if you bought a game that was you are the knight and the game that you play is moving these cubes around your stats and getting some gear and hoping to slay the dragon, that game by itself kind of wouldn't hold our attention, unfortunately. And that multiplies by all of the different roles. And so the idea is, in order for Vast to succeed, it has to be literally more than the sum of its parts, because each of its parts isn't quite game enough for us. And the bottom line is that at the end of the day, that more than the sum of its parts is not the case. It just doesn't quite live up to its own ambition. Vast is a beautifully produced, especially once you start including these custom miniatures for all of the crystal pieces. You can kind of play at whatever level of visual complexity you want. If you want to just use cardboard tokens and standees, you can do that, or use the wooden meeples and bits, or go the extra mile if you love Vast. But the bottom line is that we kind of didn't, because Vast lost us in its vastness, and it never gave us that sense of satisfaction of look at how all of these pieces work really well together. And that's the other thing to be aware of. Vast hums at 4 players best, because then the core 4 roles are in play: the knight, the goblins, the dragon, the cave. The 5th player adds a little bit of I don't really know what the thief player is doing. The way the roles interact with each other is a tremendous balancing act. I won't say that they're imbalanced, because a tremendous amount of work has gone into the balance of them. But if you play with fewer players, it's alright, playing the knight with 4 players is different than playing the knight at 3 players if nobody decides to play the dragon. It's then the victory conditions change, then what you do with your time changes, how you play. So again, Vast is this commitment of energy and learning and engagement, ultimately without providing the payoff that would make all of this worth it. So that's our take on Vast. It's a brilliant premise, but ultimately kind of falls a little short. And honestly, with this many moving parts and this many sort of factions and this total asymmetry of players, I just don't know if it can be done well. And I just don't know if it could be successfully translated into a game that would create a really satisfying experience. Hey, thanks for watching our Vast review. If you want to watch more of our full-length reviews, go ahead and click on that playlist over there. If you want to see our Game in a Minute reviews, where I do this way faster, go ahead and click on that playlist over there. And to subscribe to Gameosity and follow along with all of our videos, go ahead and click that G for me. Click it. Do it!